So when we talk about the largest river, for instance, in the region, it might not necessarily be the longest river in the whole continent there, but of the region we're speaking of, those 5 countries. Okay. Things you will notice when we're talking about this region, you've got the world's highest waterfall, you've got South America's largest lake, the world's largest rodent, lots of different mountains and highlands and plains and large river systems that we'll be going through. So we're going to talk a lot about those things today. We will start with mountain and highlands. So remember when we were doing our reading focus, we talked about main idea and then supporting details. Our main idea here is the mountain and highlands. Okay, so you want to jot that down. And then we're going to indent and talk about our supporting details. All right. So there are like 2 kind of sets of, one set of mountain range really, and the other is kind of mountains but more of highlands necessarily. So let's talk about that mountain range that's on the western part. What's the name of the mountain range on the western part there of this region, Blake Lou?
Andes.
It's the Andes. And when you were filling in your terms for today, what is the highest point that the Andes reach? Jackson?
18,000 feet.
Okay, in western Colombia, they get up as high as 18,000 feet. All right? And they talked about that the Andes Mountains, so this is one of our details, that the Andes form what they call a cordillera, and that was one of your terms also. What's a cordillera? Jackson, go ahead and again.
A mountain system made up of roughly parallel ridges.
Yeah, let me grab this front light. Okay, the picture there, it's tough to see from where you are, but it does kind of show some parallel ranges. That is a cordillera. And so the ranges are all parallel together. And a lot of the Andes Mountains, the tops of them, are active volcanoes. So throughout the Andes, you're going to see a lot of volcanic eruption, a lot of earthquakes, lots of things like that within that mountain range because of that. Okay, so that's on the western side. Now if you go over towards Venezuela, there's another kind of mountainous area, but we don't call it mountains, they're more of highlands. All right, and what are they called, these highlands? Sarah? The Guiana Highlands, and they're located in Venezuela. Okay, so this is still a detail, so we're still indenting. All right, Venezuela's highest point is in the Guiana's highlands. And the Guiana Highlands are in Venezuela, and they stretch all the way through Guyana and Suriname, too. Now, let's say we wanted to do some details about the Guiana Highlands in our notes. So how would we do that? Because these 2 bullets right here are talking about the details of the mountains and highlands. And now we want to talk about some details about the Guiana Highlands. So how are we going to show that in our notes, do you think? Who can tell me? Izzy? You indent again. So we're going to indent a little bit farther now and talk a couple details about these Guiana Highlands. And throughout the years, because they've been here for millions of years, in the Guiana Highlands, what's happened to these highlands throughout the years? What has happened to the highlands over the years? Josie?
Maybe erosion.
Erosion. What? How come they're eroding, Matthew?
Rain and wind.
Yep, and if you notice, I'm indenting there. Okay, so winds and rains have eroded them over time.
Or thunderstorm.
Thunderstorms too, yep.
Or snowstorm.
Possibly. Now, sometimes here in these Guiana Highlands, you will have these flat-topped mountains, and I'll show you a picture here in a second. Well, yeah, flat-topped mountains. What are these flat formations that you would see? What do they call those flat formations, Jessica? Huh? Not plateaus, no. Jackson?
Tapeways?
Tapeways. See how, I mean, that thing is just flat at the top. It's not like a peak or anything. It is smooth and flat. And that is a tapeways, and they're flat formations. And you see a lot of those. They're kind of unusual. They're very dramatic, and they're in the Guiana Highlands. All right, they get up to about 6,000 feet, not as high as in the Andes. So that's why we call them highlands. They're not as high as a lot of the mountains. Okay, so we can see our first main idea was the highlands here. We indented and talked about a couple details here of mountain and highlands, and we indented more so we could talk about details of those highlands. Okay, so I'm going to check that out as I'm grading your journal at the end of this chapter to see if you're doing that right, because sometimes I'm seeing people that are just, all the bullets are on one side. Well, then you don't know what goes with what, so you really got to start focusing on this. Okay? All right, so that's your mountains. Any questions on any of the mountains and highlands? Very good. Let's move on to the plains area. Plains. Okay, take a look at the map above. It's a physical map, and it shows elevation. All right. If you look between the Andes and the Guiana Highlands, what color do you notice? Clay, what color is between the Andes and the Guiana Highlands?
Oh,
What color between the Highlands and the Andes on the map do you see?
it's green.
Green. Okay, good. Aiden, what does green represent as far as elevation around what elevation?
Around sea level.
Sea level to maybe even less than 1,000 feet. So you can tell that the elevation drops big time between the Andes and the Guiana Highlands. Jeff, and in between those two regions, the Highlands and the Andes, what do we call that region? Jeff? The Llanos region. And the Llanos region, that was one of the things you had to do on your terms.
Yeah.
All right, Dominic, what is the Llanos region? What is it made of?
It's mostly grassland.
Yeah, it's mostly grasslands. Sometimes there's some few trees there, but mostly it's grasslands. And because it's mostly grassland, very low elevation, what happens there a lot? What do you think happens there quite a bit? Jackson? Floods a lot. All right? It floods a lot. There's not very much vegetation there. Things don't grow very much there, but it floods a lot. Yes?
Mud.
What?
There's a mud.
A lot of mud, too. Yep.
Like mud.
A lot of mud. All right, flip it over to the next page. Yeah, in the book.
Yeah, not your notebook page, your page in the book.
Yeah, so A4. Okay, rivers. So we got plains now. We're talking about the
you
rivers.
down
I
that you
know.
knew how much bigger they were.
Man.
Well, region,
Now, what rivers did you read about? Holly, give me one river that you read about in this region. John 84.
I thought question.
The Orinoco River is one. What's another river that you saw, Izzy?
Amazon.
Well, the Amazon is not in this region, so it wouldn't be the Amazon. Jackson?
It's like the hair.
Yeah, one.
You're looking in. I'll let. What do you got there, Matthew?
Well, I don't really.
Now, we're not talking about waterfalls, a river. Aiden?
The
Magdalena.
Magdalena.
And then the other one? Do you know
the
the,
Cauca.
yeah, Cauca. So you've got the Orinoco River, and the Orinoco River is the region's longest river. Just this region's longest river, not the whole continent. Okay. Alright, so the Orinoco River is the region's longest river. It snakes its way around, and it goes all the way through to the Atlantic Ocean. Okay. And two of the other ones that we just talked about are the Cauca and the Magdalena River. Alright. you can see where the river here is, the Orinoco. Let's see, go back. Here's your Orinoco River, goes all the way here and it flows into the Atlantic. Okay, it's the region's longest river. Okay. Lots of tributaries. What's a tributary? Can you tell me what a tributary is, Calvin?
It's a small river that like comes off like a big river.
Yeah, lots of tributaries. You can see all those little tributaries that kind of branch off. Okay? Any of these rivers that are branching off, you can see them all. They're all tributaries of the tributary? Yeah. And the Wapsie. Yep. Oh, the Mississippi River has lots. Okay, so that's your rivers of just this region. Okay, then we're going to move on to a little bit about the wildlife. There's tons and tons of wildlife here. Okay. When you read about the wildlife, what were some of the different wildlife that you saw or read about? Kylie, give me one thing. Piranhas. Izzy?
The red-billed toucan.
Toucan, yeah, they talked about the red-billed toucan, and they even talked about how there's about 500 different species of birds throughout this park that they have, which is called, it's the national park in Venezuela, and they have over 500 different species of just birds. Blake?
Jaguars.
Jaguars. Okay, what else? Ashton?
Ocelot.
You got ocelots. You did say piranhas. Matthew?
Monkeys.
Monkeys. Lots of different species of monkeys, too. Tons of different species. Dominic?
Crocodile.
Crocodiles. Yep. And I think you said ocelots. So here's a couple pictures. There's a piranha for you. On the left. Ocelot's a cute little thing, but it's probably... I don't know if they'd be the best pet. Well, if you raised them as a pet from the beginning, yeah.
It might eat you.
Yes.
Yeah, you want to be careful if you run into one of those.
It might eat you.
Anything's cute, little.
That's true. Okay, so you've got your different wildlife now. These, some of you came up with a lot of these yesterday with our bell ringer. Some of you came up with some different types of wildlife creatures, but these are the major creatures in the wild that you're going to see throughout this region. It might change the farther south we go. It might be quite similar. All right. Climate. All right. So the region that we're talking about is located pretty much right. The equator kind of runs right through most of the region. So since we run through the equator runs through most of the region, what is it like there all the time? Calvin?
Probably harder.
Yeah, it's going to be warm and hot year-round because we are right by the equator. Okay? So it's warm year-round. But what's the big mountain range that's located here? The big mountain range, Sarah? It's the Andes. So you can't just talk. You have to be called on, okay? Now, what happens when you go into the Andes Mountains? Yes. The temperatures, they drop rapidly, meaning, what does that mean? What do you think that means, Jackson?
The higher you go, the lower the temperature.
The higher you go, the lower the temperature gets. Plus, it drops very quickly, the higher you go. Yes.
It's dropped very quickly.
Very quickly. It drops very, very quickly. That means how the higher up you go in those mountains, the quicker the temperature is going to drop. It says every 1,000 feet you go, it drops about 4 degrees. Okay, so it's dropping quick. All right, so that's the Andes region. Now, what was the region between the Andes and the Guiana Highlands called? Ashton, what do we call that region again? The grassland area. What was the grasslands called? Matthew? No. Aiden?
Llanos.
The Llanos region is that grassland area between there. And in the Llanos region, what type of a climate are you going to find there? It's lower elevation. Sarah?
Tropical climate, like wet and dry.
A little bit of wet and dry. It's tropical savanna, kind of. So they experience...
There's an L, but it's pronounced, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
It's pronounced ya.
Yep.
Like Spanish, if there's two L's.
Like,
Together.
or like Chinese.
It's ya.
Jeff.
Llanos,
So,
not
yep.
Llanos. Which
Ya,
may have
ya,
confused
ya.
some of you when they're like-
2 L's makes a Y sound in Spanish.
Yep.
Like Chinese.
So when you go to the Llanos region, it's a tropical savanna, meaning both wet seasons, dry seasons, favorable conditions for just grass. Not much else. Not much else other than grass. Okay?
Tropical banana.
She's screaming at me.
Banana.
You never know. Don't worry about them. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I think my clock's off a little bit up there. We will come back now. Don't be surprised if I throw out a surprise quiz at you. I may not. It just depends on how far I get the rest of the classes. So that might tell you, remember the one time I gave you the surprise quiz?
Yeah,
Yeah, we all failed? Yeah.